My name is Anita Erskine. I am the Managing Director of Anita Erskine Holdings. We specifically focus on communications for social impact. One of the major things I hope to get out of today's SDGs investment fair in Accra is a cleaner and clearer understanding of the importance of the SDGs and how important it is for us to accelerate, our accomplishments by 2030. As a communications person who has almost intentionally and specifically focused on the importance of communicating in or around the SDGs, it's important as well that we kind of push the agenda for education. The SDGs can be a very daunting conversation depending on whom you're having a conversation with. One of my major roles is to make sure that all 17 goals are communicated in a way that is easier for people, particularly Ghanaians, to understand, absorb, digest, and then eventually make a commitment towards. So I'm hoping to have a lot of conversations with investors, with government. Of course, we saw some students as well. I'm hoping to have those conversations, and from here, hoping to create partnerships with our networking sessions so that we can continue to not only have this conversation, but learn exactly how we can, work together, we can collaborate to impact our societies with our focus on the SDGs. I am completely biased towards SDG number 4, quality education, and SDG number 5, gender equality. My foundation, the Women's Elevation Fund, focuses on girls from backgrounds, lacking backgrounds. I choose my words very carefully. Lacking backgrounds, particularly from the north, who do not have access to quality education, not because they aren't fit for it, but because they just don't have the funds. Ultimately, we know that in order for us to reach that gender parity, we need our girls to be educated. Now, it's a daunting conversation because a lot of people think that, well, the SDGs is the government's problem. So let the SDGs figure out exactly how to put these girls in schools, and let the government, figure out exactly how many schools can be a little bit more accommodating for these girls. But I am here as an advocate for the SDGs to say it is our individual responsibility. So as Anita Erskine, I'm passionate about girls, I'm passionate about education, and this connects directly to SDGs 4 and 5. And my responsibility, not only as an individual who's passionate, but also as a citizen and as a fellow woman and as an educated Ghana, is to create the kind of Ghana that not only investors want to come to, but the kind of Ghana that we Ghanaians are proud of. And that kind of Ghana is an all-inclusive Ghana, which also includes our brothers and our sisters who perhaps have lived in or grown up in poverty. They also need access to what you and I have access to. And that's why, from it being a daunting conversation, I want to break it down to it being a wholesome and inclusive and easy to understand and compassionate conversation. I think that it's so interesting because I do have a lot of partners and clients who are from the private sector. Now, the private sector has a major problem. The private sector seems to think that corporate social responsibility is synonymous with SDGs. However, the SDGs can be implemented or can be embedded in corporate social responsibility. The moment we start to help people in the private sector, particularly the bigger corporations, to understand that the SDGs is not only government's commitment to building the nation, it becomes easier for them to also ask exactly how they can participate. One of the major companies that I'm working for in Ghana, a multinational, is working with small-scale farmers across the continent. Small-scale farmers is also working with startups to get them to kind of disseminate the information to the grassroots. So this is how we bring private sector into the conversation, by showing them exactly how they embed the SDGs into CSR. Now, don't forget that the SDGs are quite expensive, depending on whom you're having conversation with. Being able to implement the SDGs is also expensive, and that's where kind of the antennae go up for people in the private sector. Now, I need to also make a thick highlight on the fact that private sector isn't only equal to large corporate institutions. And that's what sometimes the misconception is, that as long as you're talking about private sector, oh, you're talking about the Ghana Club 100. No, private sector is also you and I. So being that we are small-scale businessmen and businesswomen, we also have a responsibility because we're also part of private sector. I may have said the SDGs are expensive, but I will also in the same sentence conclude and say, but how can you help to implement the SDGs even at your level? Every little helps. Every little effort helps. So if, for example, you find yourself as, let's just say, a national service personnel, you are very excited about what you can do with the SDGs, perhaps you can teach young children. And that is, in your way, a commitment to goal number 4. If you are interested in making sure that the planet is sustainable, in your capacity as a young man, as a young woman who has a small business, you can also help young children understand the importance of picking up plastics from our beaches. So each and every one has a role. Each and every one of us has a role. Bottom line is, please seek necessary information to know where you stand, and do not make any assumptions that is somebody else's responsibility and not yours. The indigenous sector is a very lonely place to be, and I'll put this in layman's terms. Thankfully, I work with quite a lot of women up north, so I understand the degree of their loneliness. Education is our problem in this part of the world, where education also not only relates to sitting in the classroom and understanding what the teacher is teaching you, but also learning to understand what it is that you can do to impact your society. When you start talking about society, you know that society isn't just about you and me. You'll know that society also includes men and women from deprived backgrounds. And the most important conversation of all that I'm getting very passionate about is making sure that these men and women from deprived backgrounds, who perhaps are share farmers, who perhaps are barley farmers, wheat farmers, are also included in the conversation. These are the people who actually get the work done. Whether you like it or not, these are the people who actually go on their hands and knees, and they are proud to get this work done. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, mentioned here is shea butter production. When you go up north, 85% of the production of shea butter lies in the hands of the women who didn't even have access to education, by the way. However, we must learn to understand that you and I may not necessarily be born farmers, but there are people who are passionate about farming. All they need access to, perhaps, is funding, further education, and a mere understanding of exactly what they can gain if we include them in this conversation. It's becoming quite the trend, and I use the word very respectfully, the trend of creating and making shea butter. And there are so many amazing Ghanaian-owned brands that are starting to explore shea butter production. We are not where we need to be yet, but I think we need to look at this glass half full. We've started on the course. So these cooperatives are now beginning to be the order of the day, and we need to keep encouraging people like you and I, or people who are at this SDGs investment fair, to look at creating and supporting more cooperatives across the continent of Africa. You may notice I keep talking about the continent of Africa because Ghana does not exist in a bubble. And we need to start looking at it not as a Ghanaian conversation, but as an African conversation. And that's how we will meet our 2030 deadline.